So today we're going to look at price stability. Now, we've got three situations. Inflation, that's when prices are going up, or disinflation, that's when prices are going up and not so fast. So if they're going up by 5% and then they start going up by just 3%, that's not deflation, that's disinflation. Because the price increases have slowed. Deflation is negative inflation. That's when prices are going down. Okay, so we can say a low and stable rate of inflation, for example 2%, can encourage more production. That is because with a low and stable rate of inflation, we see demand, aggregate demand, high. People are spending and companies are producing to satisfy this demand. So 2% inflation can be a good effect, can have a good effect on the economy, because it means people keep buying and going in the right direction. If you've got deflation, it could mean that people stop buying. They don't need to worry about prices going up. They might stop buying, and so companies stop producing. They have enough in the warehouse, always, it seems. So, and then you've got a hyperinflation. That's a very negative situation. That's when inflation is out of control. If it exceeds 50% a month, it's considered hyperinflation, and this is so negative because it means that the money can lose its function in society, and people actually resort to barter. Bit better to barter, exchange things, than accept money which is losing value so quickly. You've got to spend it very quick before it loses serious value. So this can really destroy the functions of money, which is store of value, means of exchange, measure of value, all of it. Calculating inflation is very important for the government to understand what's happening in the economy and have policies to economic policies to deal with that economy. You've got you can calculate inflation using the annual average method, where you work out an average inflation rate for the whole year, and then you can compare it to the previous year and see what's happening. Or you can do year-on-year method, where you look at a specific month and compare it with the same month of the previous year. Obviously that's important to compare it with the same month, because you have to compare like with like. In July, for example, we're spending a lot more on holidays and sun lotion, etc. So you need to analyze the data through comparing like with like. So those are the two methods. The government normally uses a consumer price index. This will indicate the inflation rate, and to do this, the government first need to select a base year, so a year in which they consider the prices the base, and then they need to look at a basket of goods and services. So that is do a survey on what goods and services people are purchasing, and how much they're spending, to see if it's gone up from the base year. Now, some goods we spend more of our income on than others, like for example food. Maybe that's a quarter of your spending goes on food, whereas I don't know, maybe a much smaller amount goes on newspapers, for example, and that needs to be taken into account. So that every product and service is weighted according to how much we use our income for it. For example, if you spend a quarter of your income on food, it will be 25% for food. The weight will be 25%. So here we've got the category food and beverages. We've got 24.8 over 100. And then the price change. You have to find out the price change for that product or service. And then you have to multiply the weight with the price change. All the goods and services are then added up, so it gives you an indication of the inflation from the base year. Here we can see 1.8, so 1.8% is the increase in the prices for the average family, shall we say. Okay, there are problems with this way of measuring inflation. So, for example, what is the base year? Maybe 1 year is particularly high inflation rate, and if you use that as the base year, obviously, probably the prices may rise much less the next year, and so you don't get a good indication. So the base year needs to be selected, and that can really skew the analysis. Also, you've got to make sure people are representative. So the people you select to do the survey on, are they representative? And maybe they make mistakes in the survey, or even deliberately they don't declare something because maybe they feel ashamed. So maybe spending on cigarettes, they don't want to declare how much they spend, so they lie about that. So you can't always be sure that the data is dependable, is credible. And then some of the goods and services and their weights become out of date. It might be 24.8% on food, spent on food and beverages 1 year, but that might change. So, and that might change even through the year. So, and governments, maybe they don't take into account substitution. So, for example, if we use cars, we might start spending less on transport, but that might be because we're using buses. So that this isn't factored in, the fact that we could be substituting the products. Then it takes time to include new products like smartphones and get rid of the old products like, for example, CDs, etc. So that needs to happen, and maybe it doesn't always happen so immediately and when it should happen. And another problem is the prices don't take an account of improved quality. So, for example, if you're looking at inflation, if the cars are getting really more reliable and offering so much more services for safety, etc., is that taken into account, the rise in quality? Obviously, you might see a rise in price of, 5%, but then if the quality is going up, maybe the petrol consumption is going right down, that is that inflation. You're paying a bit more for a much better product. There is a difference between money values and real data. So we consider the real data when we talk about real GDP or the real prices of something. It has been adjusted for inflation. The money value is just how much a price is, and it's not considering the inflation at all. So it's got to be looked at with some skepticism. To do this, to get the money value into real data, the money value is multiplied by the base year and divided by the price index of the current year. So, for example, in 2015 a wage was 5,000. If we see this same wage going in 2016, it goes up 1,000 to 6,000. You've got and the price index was 100 in 2015 and 125 in 2016. You've got 6,000 times 100 divided by 25. And so you get 4,800, and that means that that 6,000 is actually only worth 4,800 if you want to compare it with the base year. So actually the wage has gone down, not up, if you consider the prices, the real prices, without inflation. So it's very important, this process. What causes inflation? Generally, economists say that if too much money is chasing too few goods, you'll have inflation. For example, if I'm a supplier and there's a lot of money out there, people will be buying my goods and I'll be finishing, and many more people will be wanting because there's so much money. And I'll think, well, obviously I'm not charging enough. I'll have to raise my prices. So this is why it happens. There's too much money chasing too few goods. Therefore, a good rule, if you want to avoid inflation, is to only increase the money supply if there's an increase in production, and that will avoid stagflation. Stagflation is when prices are going up and yet employment's not going up. The economy is reducing in production, and we call that stagflation, when you've got supply going down and prices going up. Now, you've got three causes of inflation. They put three categories, the economists, for inflation. You've got demand pull inflation, and this is an increase in aggregate demand. And so we can remember, if demand goes up, that pushes prices up. So generally, you've got this pull if demand goes up for products. Or you can have a cost push inflation, where your costs of production, so this could be land, labour, enterprise or capital, if that's going up, then the suppliers will want to ask higher price for the products. So that's cost push inflation. At the moment we've got energy going up, petrol going up in price, and gas, and that is pushing up inflation through this cost push inflation process. Also, you've got imported inflation. So if prices are rising in America, any products that are imported from America will reflect that, and so your inflation rate will be going up. Or maybe your exchange rate is going down. The value of your currency is going down, and so they will appear more expensive in the shops. The foreign products in the shops will seem more expensive, and this will cause inflation. The consequences of inflation can be positive or negative. So the costs of inflation, so the negatives, is you get less competitivity. We're all competing in a global market, and if it's very expensive to eat, and the restaurants are expensive, and the hotels are expensive in Italy, people may prefer to go to France. where it's cheaper, and so you'll find that you won't be able to sell so much to the foreigners. Then you've got this unplanned redistribution of income. There will be winners and losers with inflation. For example, maybe if you're a member of a strong union, you can get big wage increases, but those of a weaker union can't. And so that will skew the normal market process. Or maybe debtors are more benefiting from inflation, an economy where there's lots of inflation. If you're in debt, that debt will seem less and less over the years, and those savers will find their savings. It's difficult to maintain the value of your savings over the years. If, for example, I want to buy a house for my son, 500,000, and I know in 10 years with high inflation it'll be out of my reach, it might be better to buy it now. So otherwise I'll lose out. So people like, if you own a house already, you'll benefit from the prices going up of property. Those without property might find it more and more difficult to enter the housing market, enter a property ownership because of inflation. You've got these menu costs. By menu costs, it costs money just to change all your price tags, your catalogues, all your publicity. If they're constantly changing, the prices are constantly changing, you have to keep changing these things which cost money. You've got shoe leather costs where people are always, in a high inflation rate, there will be differing interest rates, and you'll be looking to try to find the best interest rate, and maybe moving the money constantly to avoid losing value costs money. So if I want to change my bank account, they'll want to charge for that movement. You've got this fiscal drag where some people will be moved into higher tax brackets. If the first 20,000 I paid 20% in tax, maybe after that I'll pay 30%. And if people are moving into that because of inflation, they'll be paying higher and higher taxes. It will discourage investment because generally people who want to invest and do big projects won't have the certainty to do those projects. So they won't know, what will the value, what will the cost of labour be, what will the cost of materials be. If I'm planning to build a factory, it may take 10 years or 5 years, and I've got to do a project. If there's not stability, price stability, maybe I choose another country to do a project in where there is stability, and I can be more certain of the results. Then there's inflationary noise, because money will lose that function of understanding what things are valued at. If every day you get price increases for a bottle of water, maybe people lose that sense of what a bottle of water is worth and how that water compares with other products. That we call inflationary noise. People stop having an understanding of the value of money, which is an important function of money, isn't it? Measure of value. Another big problem is it can become a vicious spiral. Both because people will be buying quickly if prices are going up. Like I said, if I want a house for my son, I better buy quick while my 500,000 can afford a house, rather than wait 5 years if there's a high inflation rate. And that demand will push up prices even further. So it becomes this vicious circle of more demand, higher prices, and so even more demand. Or alternatively, you've got the wage spiral, where you've got, you know, the wages going up because of inflation, and those wages will push prices up because you know, those people will see the cost of living is more, and so will ask for even more wages. And then there's this continuous spiral of wage increases lead to price increases, which lead to more wage increases. So that's a big danger for inflation. It becomes self-perpetuating. Some consequences can be beneficial. For example, a little bit of inflation stimulates output, like I said before. It means there is a certain aggregate demand out there for the economy, and so companies will be producing more. Up to a point. And then maybe it reduces the burden of debt. If you've got a lot of debt, that inflation will be eating away at the debt. Maybe your wages are going up with the inflation, or your pension or whatever, but the debt interest rate maybe stay the same, and so it will seem cheaper and cheaper. This is especially useful for a government, you know, that have sold a lot of bonds at a certain exchange rate. If, you know, they're printing money and inflation's going up, that debt will seem more and more manageable and less of a burden. It also prevents some unemployment. This could be because the companies can maintain the wages, yet the prices are going up, and so they're keeping costs down, really. So they've got, you know, the possibility, or if they're in a good negotiating position, to maintain few wage increases and yet put up prices as, you know, there's more money in the system and there's more demand for their goods and services. So some unemployment won't happen because of that process of people accepting not to be linked to the exchange rate in wages. What can affect the consequences of inflation? So what could create a good effect or a bad effect? It depends. You know, if the cause of inflation is demand pull, then it's more beneficial than the harmful cost push inflation. Cost push inflation can just slow the supply and the production, whereas demand pull inflation could be more positive and actually increase it. The rate of inflation obviously is key to how it's going to affect the economy. If it's too high, it will be negative. If it's a little bit more positive. Whether the inflation rate is accelerating, fluctuating, or stable. So if it's going up a lot, 20% for example, that might be okay. If it's stable, every year it's 20%, so it's not accelerating or fluctuating. There's more certainty. People can do projects and invest and build factories knowing what the environment's going to be in 5 years or economically. Also, yeah, the expectations. So whether the inflation is an expected rate is very important. Certainty is quite important for the economy. Business people need to be quite sure before, or as minimal risk as possible, before they will invest and do big projects. Also, how inflation rate compares with other countries. If the other countries have got higher inflation rates, maybe your economy looks a bit better to invest in. So there's a certain amount of competition here, isn't there? Being a global market, how we compare with other countries is important. There can be a good deflation when prices go down, or a bad deflation. For example, if deflation is the cause, is caused by an increase in aggregate supply, that is considered good. For example, with technology, if you're producing more, etc., then that could be a good reason for deflation. Or maybe you discover resources, petrol or something in the sea, or you've got more trained workers, etc. That can push prices down eventually. So that could be a good reason for inflation. Bad inflation would be due to a fall in demand. If demand falls, if we look at this diagram, demand falls, then the real GDP will go down, and prices are going down because of deflation. So that is not considered such a positive scenario by economists.